Welcome, everyone. My name is Noelle Marshall, and together with my husband, Bob Warner, who's running tech for me, we call ourselves Light Partners. We partner with light to serve our one sacred life. We're inspired recently. We're taking a 21-day racial equity and social justice challenge, and that is being put on by the YWCA. So let me go back. I want to do a screen share here. And here we go. So this is the challenge that we're talking about, a 21-day challenge, and anyone can take it. It's free, and it has been, talks about 4 different areas: about the prison system, about education, and yesterday we talked about voting, and then also we talked about public health issues related to racism. So this was our inspiration, and you can see if you would like to join that and take it yourself and share it with your friends, because there's a lot more education needs to be done in this country. It's YWCA Knox, KNOX.com/21-day challenge. And we highly recommend that. So for the next hour, we are going to be looking at a lot of different videos. And we're going to first, today we're looking at the topic of racism and education. And I met this through this video, Mark Charles, who gave me an astonishing view of our Constitution as well as the Declaration of Independence. So what I'd like to do is to share his video. I'm going to do and we'll begin from that point, because I think that everything we're talking about, how can we talk about education, racism, all these other issues, if we don't look at the root of racism in this country? So this will give you, I believe, a very good idea of some of the issues, how deep it goes.
Yak A. Mark Charles Inishya. Sin bake denan nishle to toy haglini bashes chin. Sin bake denan bashes che to the cheatney bashanella. In the Navajo culture, when you introduce yourself, you always name your 4 clans. We're a matrilineal people, and our identities come from our mother's mother. Now, my mother's mother happens to be American of Dutch heritage, and so I say Sin bake denan nishle, which translated means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Tohiglini, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Tsinbake Dinea. And my fourth clan, my father's father, is Totachitni, and that's the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. Before I go any further, I want to first acknowledge that we are on the land of the Pamunkey, the Haudenosaunee, and the Piscataway. These are the tribes that lived here. They raised their families here, they hunted here, they fished here, they farmed here, they buried their ancestors here. These were the people who had society and life here long before Columbus got lost at sea. These were the tribes that were ethnically cleansed and removed from these lands so that the state of Virginia, the District of Columbia, and the state of Maryland could be founded. And I like to acknowledge the people whose land I'm standing on wherever I go around the country. First, just to honor them and to thank them for the years they've stewarded these lands. And second, to remind myself, to remind us to be more humble as we walk on these lands, acknowledging that there is a story that goes beyond the history that we've read and that we're taught in our schools. In his final State of the Union, President Obama was talking about the need in our nation for a new politics. And he said, we the people. Our Constitution begins with these 3 simple words we've come to recognize mean all the people. Now, when I heard that, as a Native man, I had to stop and ask when. I've read our founding documents, I've studied our history, I see the current political environment, and I had to question, when did we decide as a nation that we the people actually means all the people? Let me demonstrate. Invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever. reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, convert them to his and to their use and profit. These are the words of Pope Nicholas V in a papal bull written in 1452. Now, this papal bull, along with other papal bulls written between 1452 and 1493, collectively are known as what we call the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever lands you find not ruled by white European Christian rulers, those people are subhuman and their lands are yours for the taking. This is literally the doctrine that let European nations go into Africa, colonize the continent, and enslave the people. They didn't believe them to be human. This is the same doctrine that let Columbus, who was lost at sea, land in this new world, which was already inhabited by millions, and claimed to have discovered it. If you think about it, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. If you don't believe me, leave your cell phones, your smartphones, your car keys, your laptops out. I'll come by and discover them for you. Clearly, this is not discovery, right? This is stealing, this is conquering, this is colonizing. The fact that to this day we have a national holiday honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America reveals the implicit racial bias of the nation, which is that indigenous peoples, people of color, are not fully human. So this makes the doctrine of discovery a systemically white supremacist doctrine that assumes the dehumanization of indigenous peoples. Now, the challenge is what our founding fathers have done with this doctrine throughout our nation's history. So in 1763, King George drew a line down the Appalachian Mountains, and he said to the colonies that were here that they no longer had the right of discovery of the empty Indian lands west of Appalachia. This upset the colonies. They wanted access to those lands. So a few years later, they wrote a letter of protest. In their letter, they accused the king of raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. They went on in their letter to state that he has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages. They signed their letter on July 4th, 1776. Literally 30 lines below the statement, all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence refers to natives as merciless Indian savages, making it very clear the only reason our founding fathers used this inclusive term, all men, because they had a very narrow definition of who was actually human. This, of course, makes our Declaration of Independence a systemically white supremacist document that assumes the dehumanization of indigenous peoples. Now, a few years later, our founding fathers wrote another document. They started this one with the words, "We the people of the United States." This, of course, is the preamble to the Constitution. However, if you read just a few lines later, down to Article 1, Section 2, Article 1, Section 2 is the section of the Constitution that defines who is and who is not covered by this Constitution, who is and who is not a part of this union. If you read Article 1, Section 2, the first thing you will note is it never mentions women. This is important because if you read the entire Constitution from preamble through the 27th Amendment, you will find that there are 51 gender-specific male pronouns in regards to who can run for office, who can hold office, even who is protected by this document. 51 he, him, and his, and not a single female pronoun. So we first have to note, Article 1, Section 2 never mentions women. Second, it specifically excludes natives. And third, it counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. So who's left? Well, white landowning men is who could vote. Now, we have to ponder this for a moment. The reason our Constitution was written, the purpose of our Constitution is to protect the interests of white landowning men. So today, we act shocked that women earn 70 cents to the dollar. This shouldn't shock us. Our Constitution is working. We act surprised that our prisons are filled with people of color. This shouldn't surprise us. Our Constitution is working. We act outraged that in 2010, the Supreme Court sided with Citizens United and rules that corporations now have the same rights to political free speech as individuals. This is what opens the door for super PACs, unlimited contributions to candidates. This shouldn't surprise us. The Constitution's doing exactly what it was designed to do, is protecting the interests of white landowning men. So this makes our Constitution a systemically white supremacist and sexist document that assumes the white landowning male has the authority to decide who is and who is not human. Now, about 50 years later, we had a Supreme Court case. This is Johnson versus McIntosh. It's two men of European descent. They're litigating over a single piece of land. One of them got the land from a native tribe. The other one got the same piece of land from the government, and they wanted to know who owned it, who had the right to sell the land. The case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. This is the Marshall Court, and they had to decide the principle upon which land titles were based. So they ruled that the principle was that discovery gave title to the land. And then they go on to reference the doctrine of discovery and rule that natives who were here first but are less than human, we only have what's called the right of occupancy to the land, like a fish would occupy water or a bird would occupy the air. And Europeans have the right of discovery to the land, the fee title to the land, and therefore they are the true title holders. This, of course, creates the legal precedent for land titles. This and a few other cases between the 1820s and 1830s. And this precedent and the doctrine of discovery are referenced by the Supreme Court in 1954, in 1985, and most recently in 2005. Now, I want to talk about this 2005 case for a moment. So in 1998, the Oneida Indian Nation purchased some of their traditional lands on the open market. They paid full price for them in the state of New York, which is where they traditionally resided, and they wanted to exercise their traditional sovereignty over these lands, which would mean they were not taxable. Now, the city of Sherrill, which is where the land resided, they wanted the tax revenue from these lands, and so they sued the Oneida Indian Nation in federal district court. The Oneida Indian Nation won that case, and the city of Sherrill appealed to the Federal Court of Appeals. The decision was upheld, and so they appealed to the Supreme Court. The case was heard in 2005, and in arguing this case, the court actually reversed the rulings of the lower courts, and in the first footnote of the case, when they're setting precedent, they reference the doctrine of discovery. They then go on to argue that given the Oneida's long delay in seeking judicial relief, we hold that the tribe cannot unilaterally revive its ancient sovereignty. They then go on to argue that it is impossible to rescind the cession and restore the Indians to their former rights because the lands have been open to settlement, which is white settlement, and large portions of them are now in the possession of innumerable innocent purchasers. Now, in the original 1823 Supreme Court cases, John Marshall is building his case. He actually refers to natives as savages. And he says, but the tribes of Indians inhabiting this country were fierce savages, whose occupation was war, and whose subsistence was drawn chiefly from the forests. To leave them in possession of their country was to leave the country a wilderness. Now, in 2005, the court makes almost the same argument. It says, moreover, the properties here involved have greatly increased in value since the Oneidas sold them 200 years ago. Notably, it was not until lately that the Oneidas sought to regain ancient sovereignty over land converted from wilderness to become parts of city like Sherrill. This is the same argument John Marshall was making. It's just not using the word savages. So the Supreme Court then concludes that we now reject the unification theory of the Oneida Indian Nation and the United States, and hold that the standards of federal Indian law, which again, in footnote 1, is based on the doctrine of discovery, and the federal equity practice preclude the tribe from rekindling the embers of sovereignty that long ago grew cold. This is quite possibly the most white supremacist Supreme Court decision written in my lifetime. And it was written and delivered by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You see, white supremacy is a bipartisan value, and we don't know what to do with that. In 2016, Donald Trump won the US presidency by campaigning with a promise to make America great again. Not to be outdone, Hillary Clinton responded and told her supporters that America's great already. In October 2016, in the third presidential debate, she expanded and said, America is great because America is good. And Donald Trump concurred. He said, I agree with her. I agree with everything she just said. See, they both had a broad base of agreement. They both agreed our past, our history, which included the enslavement of African people and the genocide of Native peoples, and our foundations, which are based on the doctrine of discovery and the lie of white supremacy. They both agreed those things were great. They disagreed if we were great in 2016. Donald said no and Hillary said yes. See, we were duped. Many of us thought that the 2016 election was about racism versus anti-racism, equality versus inequality. What we were actually deciding on as a nation was, did we want Donald Trump to make America explicitly white supremacist, racist, and sexist again? Or did we want Hillary Clinton to work on our behalf to keep our white supremacy and racism implicit? And we didn't know what to do with that. It's easier to call out that candidate, to demonize that Supreme Court nominee, to oppose that particular politician, than it is to deal with our foundations. Why? Because our foundations are what prop up our land titles. See, we would rather believe that the United States of America is racist and sexist and white supremacist in spite of our foundations. But the truth is we are white supremacist, racist, and sexist as a nation because of our foundations, and we don't know what to do with that. African Americans and women will never be included as equal until we deal with the racism and sexism embedded in our foundations. Native Americans, my people, will never be included in We the People until as a nation we deal with the doctrine of discovery and our dehumanizing legal precedent for land titles. There's an Aboriginal leader named George Erasmus, and he says where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, he says, you have to start by creating a common memory. I think this quote is brilliant, and it gets to the heart of our nation's problem with race, which is we don't have a common memory. We have a white majority that remembers a history, a mythological history of discovery, expansion, exceptionalism, and opportunities. And we have communities of color that have the lived experience of stolen lands, broken treaties, slavery, Jim Crow laws, boarding schools, ethnic cleansing, genocide, Indian removal, internment camps, segregation, mass incarceration, and families separated at our borders. We have no common memory, and I think we all can agree that community on a national level is absolutely in the pits. I'm proposing that the United States of America needs a national dialogue on race, gender, and class. A conversation on par with the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions that took place in South Africa, in Rwanda, and in Canada. I would call ours Truth and Conciliation, because reconciliation implies there was a previous harmony. And I think we need it sooner rather than later. My goal is 2021. Tonight, we are talking about legacy. The Iroquois did not just look 7 generations into the future. They looked 7 generations into their past. They understood that they were a part of a vast transgenerational community. And this is my challenge to you tonight. If we can learn from the wisdom of our indigenous hosts who have been stewarding these lands for hundreds, even thousands of years, if we can acknowledge the vile racism, sexism, colonialism, and white supremacy that our founding fathers embedded deep into our foundations, and if we can pivot, we might just be able to leave a different legacy for our children's, grandchildren's, grandchildren's, grandchildren. A legacy that for the first time, we the people might actually mean all the people. Thank you very much.
So I hope that gave you another view of our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence, where we are today and where we need to go. Now, what I'd like to do next, I don't know if you also realize before I leave that subject that Mark Charles ran for president in 2020. Another person who ran for president in 2020 was Marianne Williamson, and she was the only one who spoke about reparations. And so now I would like to do a screen share with Marianne.
This is part of the dark underbelly of American society. The racism, the bigotry, and the entire conversation that we're having here tonight. If you think any of this wonkiness is going to deal with this dark psychic force of the collectivized hatred that this president is bringing up in this country, then I'm afraid that the Democrats are going to see some very dark days. And the underlying cause has to do with deep, deep, deep realms of racial injustice, both in our criminal justice system and in our economic system. And the Democratic Party should be on the side of reparations for slavery for this very reason.
You have been at the forefront of the discussion of reparation. We're almost out of time. Can you just give me a 2-second
Yes, I want to make America
distillation
whole.
of that?
And a country is like an individual. You can't have the future you want until you clean up the past.
And I also like you because you want to give $100 billion in reparations.
No more than that.
To black people, more than that.
200 to 500 is the number that I sort of landed on.
Woo!
I think that if you look at the historical arc of race relations between whites and blacks in America, I think, I don't believe that the average American is racist. I don't. But I do think the average American is vastly undereducated or underinformed about the history of race in America. For every slave family of 4, they were to be given 40 acres and a mule. Politics is usually a conversation that is so disconnected from emotion, so disconnected from heart, so disconnected from our deeper human reality that given that, no wonder it became so easy for that political system to separate us from our wisdom. Germany has given $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations since the Holocaust. And I believe that that $89 billion has gone far towards establishing reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Germany and the rest of Europe. Reparations carries an emotional and psychological and even spiritual force.
So that is, you've heard from 2 presidential candidates, and I hope that inspires you to dig deeper when we have conversations about race. Now, I live in Tennessee, and I found this next clip. We're going to pivot right now to especially to our educational system. And the rest of the time, we'll be looking at that, not only the problems, but we will be looking at some solutions. So bear with me here, and we shall start.
Desegregation as to high school students in that county should be effective of the present year of 1956.
Well, Clinton was the first public high school that underwent court-ordered desegregation.
When they said that we would be attending Clinton High School, I thought nothing about it. I didn't think it would be any problems until that first day we started down the hill, and that's when I saw a lot of people who were jeering, and I knew that there were going to be some problems.
When more people came and the young boys started walking with signs, I began to wonder and think, well, maybe they're not going to accept us like I thought they were. They looked like they just wanted to grab us and throw us out. They didn't want us at all. I could just see the hate in their heart.
From people spitting on them, to pulling their hair, to 1,500 people standing on either side of the sidewalk calling them names every day just because they wanted to walk into school.
The high school was eventually bombed. That was what finally made the news.
Right now I'm standing in front of Clinton High School in Clinton, Tennessee. Last night was rocked by a bomb blast.
These were just children wanting to go to school. They had been bused a long way to a black high school, and after Brown versus the Board of Education, they had the right to, and they wanted to.
I'm telling you, that walk seemed like you were walking a million miles to go to school down there.
There was a hour of terror, really, in town because of all these incidents, and for a period of time, the black parents kept their children out of school for fear of their safety. So the Reverend Paul Turner, the minister of the First Baptist Church, came up to Green McAdoo School and walked the black students down the hill to Clinton High School. As he was walking back to his church, he was followed by members of this mob and beaten very severely.
When he was assaulted, suddenly it wasn't just a black problem anymore. And people who had not identified with those children, sadly, could identify with him.
I remember the day that he came and walked down to the school with us. And after we went into the school, we didn't know about the events that occurred to him in terms of being attacked. But in essence, it brought a little more light to the town, and things started happening. People got involved.
Even though we had to overcome mob violence, and 2 years later, the bombing of the high school, the community still stood together to see that desegregation continued.
I can't imagine how hard it was for them. I mean, you know, walking down this hill to go to Clinton High School with hatred blurred at them, how difficult that must have been. They had to brave hostility and racism and violence to get to their school, and they did it. And then finally, to commemorate that, the Green McAdoo Cultural Center and Museum was established.
It's outstanding for the young people to know about it. My grandkids and my children, they know about it, but they had to go through it.
This is a story of courage and hope and bravery that everybody in our country needs to know about.
They championed that cause of the civil rights because they didn't give up.
A lot of people say, well, man, you made history. Well, I said, well, I don't think I made history because at the time my parents said, you're going to school. And that was the law of the land.
So that began our history of integrated schools in 1954 with the Brown versus U.S. And then we saw the integration and busing, and we thought, well, this must have solved the issue. This will solve the issue. The government can do it. So why are our schools now more segregated than they ever were? We'll take a look at that in this short video.
If you've ever taken a U.S. history class, you've most likely seen photos like these. Ones that might give the impression that school segregation used to be a big problem, and then we took care of it, and now it's a thing of the past. Today, America's school-age population is more racially diverse than ever before, and that all might lead you to assume that America's classrooms are a whole lot more mixed than they used to be. Progress, right? There's been all these stories in the news that basically say that schools are actually getting more racially segregated.
The most recent data shows the average white student goes to a school that's more than 70% white.
The study ordered by Congress found the percentage of high-poverty schools with mostly black or Hispanic students has more than doubled since 2000.
So what's the real story here? Okay, first, a super quick history lesson. Hang with me. It's been more than 60 years since Brown versus Board of Education, the landmark Supreme Court decision that tossed out the argument that schools could be racially separate but still equal. It was pretty obvious that conditions in black schools were almost always much worse than in white ones. The court made a unanimous decision that black students were being denied a quality education and made school segregation policies illegal. Problem solved, right? Actually, not right away. A lot of white communities in the South fiercely resisted the new rules for years.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
It wasn't until about a decade later, when federal courts literally forced districts to desegregate, that things started to change. Southern schools really started to integrate in the 1970s and 80s because of new programs like cross-district busing that brought a mix of kids from different communities to the same schools. In 1968, more than 3/4 of all black students in the South attended hyper-segregated schools. 20 years later, that rate had dropped to less than 1/4 of all students. There are lots of historical studies showing that this change had an overwhelming positive impact on black student achievement, with pretty much no negative impacts for white students. But not everyone was happy with a more racially integrated school system. A new generation of conservative judges rejected the idea that the federal government should be in the business of forcing local schools to integrate. Districts throughout the South, and some in the North too, began to drop their controversial busing programs, which many community members had rebelled against for years. There were other factors too, including what's called white flight, when a large number of mostly white middle-class communities moved from urban areas to the suburbs. The result? There's been a massive drop in the number of schools that have a balanced mix of students who are white and students who are Black and Latino. According to a study by UCLA's Civil Rights Project, the number of hyper-segregated public schools across the country, those with pretty much no white students, has tripled. This resegregation trend has been the most dramatic in the South. But before you Northern liberals get too high and mighty, you should know that segregation is actually worse in the North. In fact, the states with the highest rates of school segregation are almost all northern left-leaning ones, like New York, Illinois, Maryland, New Jersey, and yes, even California. So in other words, forced segregation is still against the law. A school can't reject a student just because of the color of his skin. But without being aggressively pushed to integrate, many communities are still self-segregating. Some local activists see this as a natural change. It's not a racial thing, they argue. It's about parents from diverse backgrounds wanting the best for their kids. And that means going to a neighborhood school that they don't have to take a long bus ride to get to, and where they'll be with other kids from their community. It'd be one thing, they say, if a kid was prohibited from attending a school just because of the color of his skin. But those days are long gone. Now, they say, it's about choice. And the government shouldn't be in the business of making kids schlep across town just for the sake of diversity. Diversity advocates argue that what's going on here is a major step backwards in the fight for racial equality. For one, they say, diverse schools have a positive influence on all students, both white and minority. It makes students more comfortable with diversity, reduces prejudice and stereotypes, and better prepares them for success in the real world. And studies have repeatedly shown that segregated schools have a disproportionately negative impact for low-income Black and Latino students. These students are more likely to attend schools where the majority of their classmates are poor, and these schools generally have fewer resources, less experienced teachers, and lower rates of achievement. And all of that can have long-term effects, influencing everything from the chances of graduating from high school and going to college to getting a higher-paying job. So, what do you think? How diverse is your school, and how has that affected your education? Let us know in the comments below.
So that was a very good presentation that surprised me because I did not know that. I thought the schools were segregated, and this segregation by selecting or placism is still very active. And now we're going to take another look, a different look about the school to prison pipeline as another element of systemic racism in the American educational system. And this is a very detailed and expose, and I think extremely valuable.
This is a series of lectures on racism in special ed world. This one focuses on the school to prison pipeline. Little disclaimer there, you can stop and read if you wish. These are the resources primarily used for this, although I used a whole bunch of other ones. So let's take a look. Black students do not commit more discipline offenses than their white peers, yet they receive more school discipline and longer, harsher school punishments. Now, students of color receiving special ed services often receive harsher punishment than white students in special ed services. Black students with disabilities have higher rates of exclusionary discipline than white students. That means they are not in the school. They're expelled from the classroom or the school. National average, Black students lost 77 more instructional days than white students. You cannot learn if you're not in the schools. This disrupts learning and places students more at risk. High rates of exclusionary discipline negatively impacts all school outcomes, including lower test scores, negatively impacts classroom engagement and cohesion, and students are not given the tools necessary to work through the issues that cause the negative behavior in the first place. You see nothing like a good graph. School district suspension rates by black students and white students. Differences, 5 school districts. Disciplinary removal of students with disabilities by race. These are students with disabilities. Percentage. Problematic. States with the 5 largest disparity in lost instructional time. Nevada, black-white difference. Black-white difference you see. Can't learn if you're not in school. Excessive exclusionary discipline increases the likelihood that students will be retained in a grade, that they'll drop out of school, that they'll be placed in a juvenile justice system. So the overuse of suspension and expulsion is counterproductive. Zero tolerance, one-strike punishment adversely affects students of color. We're just going to get tough. Well, you get tough, and it disproportionately disadvantages students of color. Now, there's a multiple of reasons why there's this difference in discipline. All right, it could be implicit bias, social, economic, or demographic factors, healthcare. It's beyond this lecture. I just want to point out what is. Let's take a look at policing and lack of counselors. School resource officers, security guards, are not highly effective. There's no research to show that they reduce school violence or reduce school shootings. Law enforcement and arrests are often used for non-criminal behaviors that used to be handled by administration. They now have the security guard do. Black students represent 16% of the student population, yet 27% of referrals to law enforcement and 31% of school arrests. All right, less, more. While white students represent 51% of the school population, 41% of referrals, and 39% of school arrests. More, less. Less, more, less. That's problematic. Students with disabilities, as represented by IDEA, represent 12% of the population, yet 28% of students arrested are referred to law enforcement. Now, many security guards, school resource officers, have little or no training in working with youth and less training in working with students with disabilities, including students with mental health issues. In 2015-16, sworn law enforcement officer, cops, physically or mechanically restrained 86,000 students. 71% of these were students with disability, even though students with disabilities represent only 12% of the population. You see this intersectionality of race and disability discrete. Now, the lack of school counselors. 1.6 million students attend a school with a sworn law enforcement officer, but no school counselor. Where are you putting your money? Are you going to wrest your way to better behavior? In schools, there are 27 security guards, 27 schools with security guards, but only 23,000 with social workers, a difference of 4,000. Latinx, Asian, and Black students more likely than white students to attend a school with a sworn law enforcement officer but no counselor. Schools with high poverty rates have the highest percentage of sworn law enforcement officers on campus. Why is this important? Because students who attend a school with a security guard are 5 times more likely to be criminally charged or have disorderly conduct versus students in schools with no security guards. All right? Total arrests. Without security guards, with security guards. School counselors, it has been shown, improve school safety and increases school achievement. That's where we should put our resources. As well, students facing crises or emotional distress incidents, they need mental health school counselors and mental health professionals, not law enforcement, not security guards. Racism in Special Ed World, School to Prison Pipeline. This is a series of lectures on racism in special ed world. This one focuses.
So I hope you found that instructional, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper now and look at the school to prison pipeline.
In the wake of George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis, policing and racial injustice have become a national conversation, and a key focus, the school-to-prison pipeline. The pipeline is exactly what it sounds like, a direct connection between our schools and the juvenile justice system. Basically, a student is disciplined by their teacher and gets suspended, or sometimes the teacher calls in the school police officer, or sometimes the police officer disciplines the student first. Or the student gets suspended more than once, so they get labeled a bad kid and begin to believe it. Then they fall behind in school, or they get expelled, and then the school police officer arrests them for truancy, and now this is getting way too complicated. So let's break it down. The clearest way to see the school-to-prison pipeline is police in schools.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground!
Most schools call police officers on campus SROs, or school resource officers. While some districts have recently ended their policing programs, federal money continues to support this practice. In 2020 alone, almost $50 million in federal grants helped hire more than 400 new officers.
In a lot of school districts, school police actually make more money than teachers and counselors and educators who have to go to college or get graduate level coursework to do their job. So 50 million could buy a lot of counselors, a lot of social workers, a lot of nurses. Districts find other ways to sustain these police positions at the cost of other critical services.
The National Association of School Resource Officers argues that officers can be trained to fill these roles, but in most states, training requirements for school police don't exist at all. Advocates say hiring educated mental health professionals would be more beneficial.
And I'm not sure with some of the complicated histories of, again, communities of color and the police, that they're even necessarily the best people to be receiving that training or doing that job to begin with.
Safety and security are fundamentally two different things. Districts are trying to do security at the expense of safety.
Maria points out that police in schools started with school desegregation. When Los Angeles Unified School District desegregated, police were brought in because officials were worried about school property damage. Lately, districts have increased school police on campus in response to school shootings. But there has never been a school shooting that was ended by a school resource officer. Instead, policing has become part of the school disciplinary process. Teachers refer students to law enforcement for things ranging from bringing a weapon to school to minor disruptive behavior.
At least one carefully selected, specifically trained SRO for every school building. We believe that every school in this country could benefit from that. I'm not sure who it is that's feeding the school-to-prison pipeline to the level that it's being described, but it's not us. It's not our members.
But with a quick Google search, videos of school resource officers using excessive force are not hard to find.
I recognize that even as well-trained as a lot of our folks are, they can still have a bad day or make a mistake.
Michael Blanchette was enrolled in special education at Narragansett High School in Rhode Island. He had an individual education plan that allowed him to leave class and walk through the halls to relieve anxiety. In February 2018, the 16-year-old was stopped by a school resource officer while on a hallway walk. According to the police report, Michael aggressively stepped toward the officer and gave him the middle finger.
When you're young, you do things that are not normally what you hope other people who are more mature would not do. But you expect that of young people. It's a school. But that doesn't mean that because someone's disrespectful, that you have the right to violently attack them.
He was body slammed and held to the ground for 6 minutes. Michael was charged with disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. When the case came to trial, the charges were dismissed. The officer involved is still working for the Narragansett Police Department. Children in special education, like Michael, are disproportionately referred to law enforcement, but they are not alone.
Racism, sexism, transphobia, homophobia, ableism, all filter down into school environments.
And we as a society, as the United States, have not nearly done our work to grapple with how these things hinder our fellow human beings.
And these disparities show up in every part of the pipeline. Exclusionary discipline, like suspensions and expulsions, makes kids more vulnerable to arrest, putting them on both a direct and indirect path to prison. We'll talk about the direct path first. When a student is suspended, it's up to the parent or caregiver to ensure the child is at home. And when parents are working, this can be hard. If the child is left to their own devices, they may be more likely to get in trouble with the law or fall behind in school.
Whenever I talk about this, it always comes down to racism. And some of that racism is explicit, intentional racism, and some of it is implicit bias, people not realizing the biases they have because everyone on the planet has biases.
In 1975, the Children's Defense Fund found that Black students were disproportionately suspended at nearly 3 times the rate of white students. According to this study, these disparities came from both explicit and implicit biases held by teachers and school administrators. And 45 years later, this hasn't changed. In 2019, researchers from Princeton University analyzed data from about 96,000 public schools across the US. The results? Black students are about 2.5 times more likely to be referred to law enforcement, 3.5 times more likely to be arrested at school, and 4 times more likely to be suspended than white students. That same year, the U.S. Commission for Civil Rights published a report that said students of color do not misbehave at higher rates than their white peers, but they do receive harder and longer punishments in school. Christina says this happens because school codes of conduct are vague. They give teachers and school administrators leeway to decide what the rules actually mean.
I'm going to use an example of dress codes about hair. There is a dress code that says if you're a boy, you can't have your hair below your ears or below your neck. Hundreds of white male students had hair that did not comply with that dress code. And then my 2 clients who were Black boys had their hair in locks. Those kids were sent to in-school suspension because of their hair, even though white male students that were also out of dress code were not.
And this brings us to the indirect way suspensions affect kids.
Not only is there this disconnect with identity with school, but I think there is kind of a stigma that then gets attached to that kid. It sends the message to students that they're not welcome there, they don't belong there. And it creates kind of a negative, vicious feedback loop.
So if a student is labeled a bad kid, they start to internalize it. And these messages can hit hard, especially for children of color.
As I began to work with children, because my goal in life was to make sure no child ever felt the way that I did, I realized that adults choose what children they really don't like and don't want to deal with. And then they decide who the problem child is. If you've had that history where you feel like you're being targeted, you're much more concerned about not getting in trouble, the teacher not pointing you out, not being picked on, than you are about learning.
It kind of inhibits that child's willingness to kind of be their full self. And teachers are so central to kids' identity. It damages their relationship with their current teacher, but also future teachers. And that's a slippery slope, because once young people start feeling like they don't belong in school systems, that's when you get withdrawal, not coming to school, not being fully invested. And that's where we lose our youth.
This can lead to students falling behind in school. And as endless studies show, kids who fall behind in school are more likely to drop out and then to enter the pipeline to prison. It can also lead a child to entering the negative feedback loop Angela talked about. And if there's a school police officer, this cycle only accelerates. Some schools have implemented restorative justice programs to prevent exclusionary discipline and arrests. The most successful programs focus on the student recognizing and repairing harm through mediation with teachers, family, and other students. In Chicago public schools, after changing the codes of conduct to include a more restorative approach, there was a 76% decrease in out-of-school suspensions.
I think so often we talk about the physical violence, but it is violent when you are intentionally enacting harm on another human, and I think enacting harm on another human is not investing in their education.
So, how can these inequities change?
I always tell my students that our education system is like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. it's been broken for a long time. The lack of cultural synchrony, in my opinion, is what really contributes to the discipline disparities that we see, is teachers misunderstanding, misinterpreting the behaviors of children that are really benign and innocent.
This training on culture is important because when kids in underserved communities are disciplined in a disproportionate way, especially early in their childhood, the other students in the classroom learn how to think about and treat the people in those communities, laying the foundation of systemic discrimination we see in the country today.
If we can get teachers to be anti-racist social justice teachers, and those youngest children who are the future doctors, lawyers, and nurses, and police officers, they grow up in anti-racist classrooms and environments, and I believe that can change the world.
So I hope that gave you a lot of new views about what's going on in our education system. And I do want to end with one very positive development in the Oakland schools about how to use restorative justice. And perhaps we could use this throughout our whole society.
I come in peace, Ashe. With my mind I greet you, Ashe. With my voice I greet you, Ashe.
What chanting does, it helps to build community. It helps to build unity. It helps to build one voice. Then you also notice one single voice may rise out of the group as a call and then a response.
I am somebody, and I won't be stopping nobody. I got my fists in the air, moving my feet. I got love for my people. It starts with me.
Reach Academy is a public school in Oakland, in an area that's seen its share of violence.
Because of the trauma and the history just in Oakland itself, and particularly in this area, there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot that needs to be restored.
Nimit Shahid is what's known as a restorative justice practitioner. She's one of about 30 employed by the Oakland Unified School District. Restorative justice is a set of practices that varies in schools across the country. In Oakland, it's used to build community, as well as to resolve conflicts and provide individual support to students who need it most.
The school board passed a resolution in early of 2010 saying we should use this to intentionally move away from our racial disproportionate discipline, specifically of African American students. In Oakland, there's restorative justice happening all over. It's not just in the schools. The seeds were planted long ago at the Black Panther Party. This is a legacy of that movement, the social justice movement in Oakland. And so we decided to take this, really a holistic philosophy and break it into the 3 tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3.
And helping others when they need it.
Restorative justice is a practice that really supports every child in terms of being successful.
And our second question is, on a mood scale from 1 to 10, how do you feel right now?
It starts off with our morning circles and our closing circles. And it's a way to sort of, set the tone for the day.
90% of the restorative justice in Oakland schools is happening in these types of classroom circles. That's tier 1. The topics change day to day, but one rule is firm. Only the person with the talking piece has the floor.
And I'm similar to Rajan because we both play football. And I'm similar to Nehemiah because we both do crazy things. It means getting along with my classmates, sharing our feelings, getting to know each other. It makes me more comfortable to know that there's people that have stuff in common with me and that some of them are nice and they want to be your friend.
I was scared at the beginning, but school got better to me and I liked school. It means a lot to me because I get to learn about my whole community, my peers, and everybody in my class. It helps me know about them.
When students are able to relate to each other and find those common grounds, then it helps to eliminate any issues that might arise with that many personalities. We also use the circles for conflict resolution and finding ways to keep what's happening at home and what's happening on the yard and what happened in the cafeteria, keeping it out of the classroom.
Because we both eat a lot.
It's a way to practice and learn social and emotional skills like self-awareness and social awareness. Simply sitting there in a circle waiting for your turn to talk, you're exhibiting so much social emotional learning.
Breathe in, breathe out.
You should go into classrooms and you should see students leading the mindfulness. And so you'll see the students up front. You'll see the students leading the affirmations.
When you can no longer hear the bell, please open your eyes.
Those affirmations, I have the power to make wise choices. I have the power to make wise choices, is a way of reaffirming that our students do have ownership over their learning.
While classroom circles are powerful, sometimes more direct intervention is needed. Restorative justice is a tool to start the process of healing between a victim and offender.
So when you think about how they might have felt.
Tier 2 are when students have been in a conflict or there's been a harm. It's a way to have dialogue with all the impacted parties around what happened, ultimately what can be done to make it right.
When you put your hands, right, on their bodies and invaded their personal space, how do you think they felt now? What do you think about now?
Mad.
You think they felt mad, right? Do you feel like that was a wise choice?
No.
Okay, so what would you say to them? You would tell them what?
I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that again.
A school that had, over 20% chronic absence rate, a school that had a soaring suspension rate, a school that had over 500 universal office referrals. We've seen that cut in half. And so it's made a huge difference.
It's really important that we all have a safe.
The final tier, Tier 3, is individualized support for a student. This circle of adults is all here for Cedric, a high schooler who's coming back to school after being incarcerated.
And I need you to believe when everybody in this room said they're here for you.
My mom and my dad was there. I feel like to canceling this and be like, nah, I'm good. It was too much attention.
It's really just a way to welcome them to school and support them in ways that they need to be successful.
And let some of us worry about that load, but you gotta tell us.
I started noticing that y'all was here to help me and see what was going on in my head. Y'all touched me. Y'all made me feel like I can do it.
Our goal is to prepare our students with the 21st century competencies, skills, and dispositions that they're going to need to not only survive in this world, but to thrive. And what does that mean to be college and career ready? So for us, restorative justice and restorative practices is a way to ensure that we level the playing field, especially as it relates to equity, access, and accountability so that all of our children have a pathway to ensure that they're being successful.
Goodbye, goodbye. G-O-O-D-B-Y-E.
Goodbye, So it is time, we're a little bit past our time to say goodbye, goodbye. But it looks like there isn't anyone else using this room at this current time. So if anyone would like to turn on your video or raise your hand, have a comment. I have enjoyed putting this together because I've learned so much, starting with our first speaker who educated me about my own Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and how deep the racism is, how insidious it is and implicit it is in so much of our society. Go ahead, Regina.
Hello, everyone. I found the presentations very interesting. I had the pleasure when COVID first hit of working with a team here in Durham centered around the effects of virtual learning for the Black and Brown students. And so a lot of things that was brought out the video, like to bring it to life for a lot of people that want to ignore it or say that's not the problem, how this was generational and how it just didn't start overnight. So we as a team was even saying, I have my little one here watching it with me because I don't let weekends like this just to be a free weekend to relax. Like it's a purpose behind it. And even with that, you know, I've served in the military. I had multiple family members that served in the military. So to say that I come from a family bloodline of breaking the stereotype and breaking the lines and the barriers, like, I'm so grateful for this presentation, and I wish a lot of more will wake up to it and just really make some, when they say, how do we, billions of dollars go into the prison to pipeline system and things like that, when we can just put that money elsewhere. I have educators in my family who have spent hundreds of their dollars of their paychecks just to put it into their students and pour it into their students, and yet they're wondering how they're going to pay their mortgage and stuff. So when I think of all of that and just where the funding and how some people just want to really ignore this, just speaks volumes. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina. Thank you for sharing your point of view. And yes, there's a expression out there, defund the police. And I try to explain to people it's that we want to redirect those funds so that they could be more functional and helpful to our communities. It's not a slam against the police. It's like, these people are obviously, most states have no qualifications for what they're doing. And I appreciate you, your journey, your family as educators, how you're spending time with your child there and bringing them into this. It really warms my heart. So thank you for your comments. Okay, I'm also going to call on Mari. It looks like Mari, I'm going to ask you to unmute. And would you please share?
Yes, this is actually going to be really controversial, okay. I think. I just got this idea while I was watching the videos. First of all, my best friend is African American, and I have heard about so many atrocities. And I'm the type of person, I'm actually Caucasian, but I'm the type of person that really wants to find out the truth and believes that we should teach real history in the schools. And I don't believe that's happening. I believe that that it has been done on purpose for so different people can be held down. But this is what the interesting part to me. Suddenly I had this epiphany, and this is going to sound way out there and almost contrary to anything anybody might want to believe, but when there was segregation, in a sense, I feel that the oppressor, that was their first mode of operation. And then if everybody had been kept in oppression, then there would have been a rebellion. And I'm wondering, I'm just putting this question out there. Was the act of desegregation part of the oppression also? And why I'm saying that is, if you suddenly tell everybody, okay, we'll desegregate you, then the oppressor won't have as many rebellions going on. And then everybody's trying to clamor to get into the system as is. And so we're fighting to get into the system that way instead of remaking a system that was bad to begin with. And suddenly it just occurred to me, oh my God, it's like maybe we're fighting to get more in their system, and that's how they control us. And so that went off in my head while I was watching your stuff, and I'd never thought that in my entire life. Suddenly it was, because to me, it makes so little sense to, unless you want to control people, it makes so little sense to ever behave that way at all. And we've all kind of had to accept this system and have it run our lives. We're all slaves to this system. So the question is, are we getting the education we need, or are we being told what they want us to believe? We're being systemized. So we raise our hands, we stay in line, we do this, we do that. It's like, and so anyway, I'm just bringing that question up. Anyway, that just came to me.
And that's good. That's good to have a discussion and different perspectives and points of view and epiphanies, as you said. I don't, really have an answer other than I don't know exactly who they are, but I do feel from my personal experience that we have not had a, you know, the one first speaker, Mark Charles, spoke about the mythology of this country, and the mythology needs to be we need to look at it closer, because it is a myth, and we have been told stories about the Columbus, the great discoverer. And the more that I dig and the more that I find out, you know, this is, I'll just go off on a little tangent here. I found a series that Oliver Stone did called The Untold History of the United States. It's a video series. You can actually find it free on YouTube. It is other places. And I learned so much of that. And I didn't know whether, you know, who's Oliver Stone, what's his perspective, what's his slant. But I met the professor who actually wrote the 700-page book. He's at American University. And that Oliver Stone based his whole 12 series on. So I think it came from a very, we say, research, and you know, it wasn't like a conspiracy theory, but it opened my eyes to a lot of things about this country. And I think that's the best that we can do, is to continue to dig and feel what is truth for us, and to continue to have conversations. Whether you started out saying this might be controversial, I don't find it controversial. I find it, even if you said something I was diametrically opposed to, I would say, let's have a conversation about that, so I can understand your perspective and where you're coming through. And what I'm really feeling from you is that you are looking for truth, and you are digging and trying to understand more. And I congratulate you for that. So I hope these videos there's a lot of resources in there. If you want to get, you know, we can send you the resources that go along with this. And I don't know if I've answered your question, but I just hope yeah. Okay. Let me see, you just had, let me see, you're muted again. So I'll just ask you to mute. Go ahead.
I didn't mean to, well, I meant more the colonizer mindset, the spirit of, and thank you for correcting me, because I got to stop that kind of stuff, but the spirit of wanting to control, the spirit of wanting to get on top of, the spirit of wanting to be separate, the spirit of the personality that wants to think it's more than, versus that we're all in this together. And also that spirit of fear, you know, that is really ruling the roost, that created this to begin with. And so I'm just seeing, some of the actions that look like they might be great, maybe are part of the system that we are perpetuating. And that's just something that occurred to me anyway. So thank you for your comment, and I'm very interested. This is like one of the most important topics in my life, really, because I believe wholeheartedly that until we greet each other as kin, and we see each other's beauty and strength, and all of us are medicine, and all of us have a sacred place in this hoop, that we're just absolutely going down the wrong path. And I don't really believe this way we're doing things with the colonization and all that. I think it snuck up on all of us, even European people, and that maybe it is not for our best interest to become good capitalists. So thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. I love the conversation. And I will say that you probably missed our presentations we did on voting rights as well as public health. And we got into some colonization issues in our presentation yesterday that I think you would find very interesting. So, and having said that, we're going to package all four. We're doing another one tomorrow on the criminal justice system. So all these comments are welcome, and anyone who would like, we're going to try to package these all up at the resources. Also, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we got inspired to do this because of the 21-day social equity. And let me get the proper racial equity and social justice challenge that's being offered by the YWCA. So if you, Bob will put it in the chat. If you go to YWCA Knox, KNOX, short for Knoxville, Tennessee.com, a 21-day challenge. It's free, it's wonderful, it has so many resources. So that's what inspired us to do this series of presentations. So dig in, Mari, dig in. You're quite welcome.
We got Karen there too.
Okay, and we also have a comment. Karen, I'm going to ask you to unmute and join the conversation. And please.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi there.
Thank you so much for this powerful conversation and the women who just shared before. I know one of the things I'm grateful for, I just popped into this one and I was in your first one, is that I've been having this conversation. So I'm very grateful for your resources because I can use them, which sometimes just, I can be so emotional and sentimental and get wrapped up into something. Yet sometimes when you're just presenting facts, then I can be quiet and let them land. And I know that I myself really had to have these conversations and do this work, which has been happening since March in my own family. I'm a mother of 4 grown boys. And I was really, really excited that they suggested we have a conversation with their dad and I, who raised them, we're no longer married, and really addressed somebody on your presentation the first day at the very end, just talked about whitewashing. And I think for me, and I actually know Noelle, and I think Noelle, something you just said, like, I'm 55 and I'm still like realizing how thick the whitewashing has been and still is. Yes. So my commitment as a family coach is to have these conversations in family rooms, either via Zoom or in person, share these amazing materials. So thank you. And as we're talking about the educational system, I think what's so important, there was another offering today with International Children's Month.com or internationalchildrensmonth.org, Heidi Little. And what I think is so important, and I know that I'm going to cultivate, is while we're working on and while we're making our offerings to change the public educational systems, to be participating in groups like what she's doing and to be teaching our children amongst beloved communities such as the one we've been in all weekend. And that's a way that we can truly honor our children and how intelligent they are and how compassionate they are. I let my boys go through the public school system in California with a lot of leeway. So I just know we can't wait for that system to change. We need to be sprinkling in our offerings such as this. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And we appreciate having you here. And yes, we've known each other a long time and know your work with families as well as Heart Thread and the Alchemy of the Heart. You're one of the most heart-centered people I know, and you bring it to everything you do. And we really appreciate that. But Bob, have there been any comments from the from
Facebook,
from the chat, or
not in Facebook lately, but you've got a couple of chats here from some folks, including Sean Jordan.
I'm going to ask you to unmute. There you go.
Yeah, I'm sitting here listening to this going, Yeah, I sorry to butt in. I just, if I'm doing that. I guess I just want to say thank you very much for this. This is wonderful to see that we are connecting the dots, and I'm in Canada, and to see that the dots are being connected over such vast distances and between people, so many different people, and also all at once. You know what I mean? We see the need for this. And the beautiful thing about this is we are finding a way to build the new system from the ground up instead of top down. And that's why this is so important, and for us to share our skills and our knowledge with each other, because I'm interested in making change here in the community that I live in, which has its own similar problems, you know, everywhere. It's everywhere. And the more we learn from each other, and the more we encourage each other, and the more we support each other, the quicker this is going to happen. And I just thank you all for letting me share that, and for you for sharing this with me. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. And may I share also?
Yes, Bob.
So I really appreciate that, and the other comments as well. We Noelle and I only had a few years where we had foster daughters in the public school system, and it was late in their school years. And we're realizing now at our age that when it comes to education, we really haven't engaged in at the local level, dealing with these issues that were covered by a lot of these videos in our education systems, and really have a big respect for those parents that are involved in PTA and other local school system conversations, because it is there at the local level where so much is accomplished. And everything that we saw in some of these videos about everything from restorative justice to what do they call it? RSOs? SROs, and you know, are they doing what is needed for the children? So I really appreciate it, and I really feel that this is so on target with the Martin Luther King Day of Service. We listened to service today when we were out for a walk from our local Unitarian Universalist church, and pointed out that this weekend and the National Day of Service for Martin Luther King is not a day to have off, meaning you have off from your day job, but it's a day to be on. And that on is all the things that are not necessarily accomplished through formal educational systems. So thank you, Karen. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Mari.
So I think we need to wrap it up. As much as I'm just so grateful that you all came and participated in. I wish we had more time to discuss this, but I'm going to put also in our email, so you can contact us if you would like to follow up with anything, or if you'd like to get a copy of all 4 of the videos that we're doing for this Martin Luther King Building Beloved Community. Just like Sean said, it needs to be from the bottom up community, knowing our atonement at 1 minute. So with that, I have to say thank you, and to everyone, thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Peace and blessings. May peace prevail on earth, and peace prevail in our U.S. Capitol and U.S. state capitals this week.
Yes. Oops, I have to get one more in. Linda says, children need to understand they are spiritual beings and were created noble. They all have hidden gems that education alone can reveal. The teachers and resource officers need to see that in every child. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
May peace prevail with our children.
For additional resources for supporting spiritual growth, environmental sustainability, social justice, and democracy reform, please check out our website at www.lightpartners.org.